Hello, my name is Agnew. I'm a flute player from Belfast and I'd like to explore birdsong in music. One of the silver linings of lockdown has been that we can hear the birds a bit louder than before. And when I've been out on walks, I've been thinking about why my instrument has been used across centuries to depict birdsong. It's not the only instrument that is used. Piano, clarinet, oboe, violin and cello all have examples. But I do think it's the flute that has been used most of all. Perhaps it's the tone of the instrument that lends itself. But there are other features as well. It's one of the most high-pitched instruments, and it's a very nimble instrument. You can move from pitch to pitch very quickly and trill very fast between notes. So we'll explore some famous examples of birdsong in music through these videos. As we go, I hope you'll learn a little bit about the development of the flute as an instrument, about what inspires composers to draw on nature, and how they actually bring that to life in their pieces. Some of them simply use the idea of birdsong, but others go very far and try to quote actual birds in their pieces and imitate them very directly. We'll explore pieces from the early 1700s to the present day. There'll be solo examples and large symphonic and ballet works. And we'll also look at pieces from far afield and some much closer to home. So we'll start by looking at the instrument itself. The flute is actually the oldest known instrument in the world. In 2012 in Germany, there were flutes discovered that were between 42 and 43,000 years old. In much more recent history, say the last 500–600 years, the term flauto is used in Western classical music to describe flutes, and that includes both vertical flutes and horizontal ones. During the Baroque era, there started to become a distinction between those terms. So the flauto is what we know as the recorder, while the flauto traverso, which means sideways flute, is what we call the flute today. The traverso, as it was called, became more popular, and all the major composers wrote for that instrument. So we have wonderful works by Bach, Handel, Telemann, and Vivaldi. And it's Vivaldi's music who we'll look at first. Antonio Vivaldi was an Italian composer born in Venice. He was known as the Red Priest because he had curly red hair and because he was a priest. Some of his music that was lost has recently been rediscovered. In fact, one of his flute concertos, Il Gran Mogol, was found in Scotland just 10 years ago. He worked as teacher, composer, conductor at the Pio Ospedale della Pietà in Venice for 37 years. That was a school for orphaned girls, and I often think about how talented those girls must have been when you see how virtuosic his music is. Vivaldi had a huge output. He wrote over 500 concertos for many different instruments, and there are 15 that are for flute. The most famous of those are the 6 concertos in Opus 10, and that was published in Amsterdam around 1728. The first 3 of those have programmatic elements, and they are based in nature. So the first concerto, La Tempesta di Mare, the Sea Tempest, the second one, La Notte, the night, and the third one, which we'll look at today, Il Gardellino, the goldfinch. In Il Gardellino, Vivaldi demonstrates a perfect understanding of the flute. He uses trills, leaps of pitch, fast alternating repeated notes, dotted rhythms, all which help to convey the sound of the goldfinch. The concerto follows the standard form of the time, so there are 3 movements, fast, slow, and fast. In the opening movement, the orchestral ritornello gives way to a lovely flute solo, and it allows the soloist the chance to set the scene and evoke the image of the goldfinch. In the Baroque era, recycling your own music wasn't uncommon. It was very natural for a piece to be played on different instruments, as we'll see in the next piece. Francois Couperin was a French composer, organist, and harpsichordist. He was known as Couperin le Grand, which means Couperin the Great, to distinguish him from other family members who were musicians, although I'm not really sure what they would have said about that. He left behind a huge legacy of keyboard music. His 4 volumes of harpsichord music contain 230 pieces, and they're grouped together in a kind of suite. His pieces can often be very expressive, and they have very picturesque titles, such as The Little Windmills or The Mysterious Barricades. It is said they're like little miniature tone poems. Le Rossignol en Amour, The Nightingale in Love. This is a beautiful harpsichord piece by Couperin, and it works particularly well on the flute. The composer himself actually said, "This rossignol can be performed with the greatest possible success on the flute, when it is well played." Couperin is very particular about the ornamentation in the piece, and unlike most other Baroque composers, he didn't like to leave that up to the performer to decide. But like the Vivaldi, we see similar tricks, trills, turns, repeated alternating notes, and a degree of rhythmic freedom, which all help to depict the nightingale. So now we're going to jump forward about 100 years and look at one of the world's most famous composers, Beethoven, and his 6th Symphony. Ludwig van Beethoven was a German composer and pianist. His works span the transition from the classical period through to the early Romantic. The 6th Symphony, which was written in 1808, is one of few of his works that contain programmatic content. Beethoven loved nature. He loved to walk in the countryside, and it's said that he really liked to escape Vienna when he could and work in rural locations. The 6th Symphony he described as more the expression of feeling than painting, and he gave each movement a beautiful title. Towards the end of the second movement of the symphony, there is a cadenza for woodwind instruments, which is an opportunity to imitate bird calls. The flute is the nightingale, the oboe is a quail, and the clarinet becomes a cuckoo. Beethoven actually goes so far as to even write the bird names into the score of the piece. Once again in the flute part we see trills and fast alternating notes. In the oboe part there's a distinctive dotted rhythm, and the clarinet fairly accurately mimics a cuckoo call. The last piece that we'll look at today is L'Oiseau des Bois, Forest Birds, by the 19th century virtuoso flute player and composer Franz Doppler. Doppler wrote this piece for an unusual combination of instruments, 4 horns and solo flute. The horns themselves create a mellow forest background to the virtuosic flute part. In fact, the calmness of those instruments accentuates the excitement of the birdsong. We see similar effects to previous pieces we've looked at today, trills and fast alternating notes, and there's also a degree of rhythmic freedom in this piece. In the score you'll see more details of expression and dynamics, typical for the time, and they do help add to the overall effect of birdsong in the forest. So thank you for starting this journey with me, looking at birdsong and flute music. I hope you enjoyed the musical examples from today, and please do follow the links if you'd like to listen more. Next time we'll look towards the 20th century and some of the most famous composers from that era, such as Ravel and Prokofiev. I look forward to seeing you then.